Usually when we talk about getting a diagnosis, there is this underlying expectation of, well, total precision.
Right, like an engineering mindset.
Exactly. Like if you take your car to the mechanic because it's making some strange noise, they don't just stand there and guess.
No, they plug a computer right into the dashboard.
Right. The machine runs a scan, it spits out a highly specific error code, and the mechanic can just point to a part and say, there it is, the oxygen sensor. It's broken.
And it is entirely binary. It's definitive. And honestly, we crave that kind of certainty, right? We genuinely like things to be visible and neatly categorized. We want a single, indisputable answer to our problems.
But then you step into the world of business.
Yeah, that's where the certainty vanishes.
It really does. You look at a massive multinational corporation, or honestly, even just a local mid-sized manufacturing company down the street, and you try to diagnose its health.
And suddenly, that clean, precise diagnostic machine is completely broken.
Exactly. To an outsider, looking at a business is like staring into incredibly murky water. I mean, you see millions of dollars moving around. You see record profits being declared on the evening news.
But then that exact same company announces a massive wave of layoffs the very next morning.
Yes. It makes absolutely no sense to a normal person.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. If you don't possess the right tools to actually see through that, Mark, the behavior of the corporate world looks, well, entirely irrational.
Like they're just guessing.
Right. And you end up confusing the symptoms with the disease. Or worse, you mistake a terminal illness for a minor cold.
And I think the big problem is that outsiders, and frankly a lot of people working inside these companies too, they confuse the people keeping the score with the generals who are actually fighting the war.
That is a very good way to put it.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. For you listening right now, we are going to decode the secret language of business.
Because it really is a language of its own.
It is. We are taking the dense, often deeply intimidating world of corporate finance, accounting rules, financial structures, and we are translating it into clear, actionable insights for you.
No finance degree required.
Exactly. Whether you are prepping for a major business meeting, or you're trying to understand the actual health of the company you currently work for, or if you just have this intense curiosity about how the financial gears of the entire world turn behind the scenes.
You are going to walk away with the ultimate diagnostic toolkit today.
Because like you said, once you understand the specific vocabulary and the underlying grammar of corporate finance, a spreadsheet full of raw numbers completely transforms.
It stops being math, and it becomes a living, breathing story. It's about human decisions, market forces, survival.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The fundamental place to start is drawing a massive, bright red line between two concepts that people, myself included, for a long time, honestly use interchangeably.
Accounting and finance.
Yes. Accounting and finance. If we want to understand how a business operates, we have to separate the scorekeepers from the strategists.
It is the most critical distinction to make before we even look at a single number on a page. Conflating accounting and finance is exactly like confusing the historian who is writing the definitive account of a battle with the frontline general who is currently directing the troops under fire.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because they are both intensely focused on the exact same battlefield, but their purposes, their timelines, and their mentalities are entirely different.
So let's define the historian first.
Yeah.
What is the true essence of accounting?
Well, accounting is fundamentally obsessed with the past.
Okay.
It is the rigorous, highly systematic process of recording, classifying, and reporting financial transactions that have already occurred. It's
Yeah.
highly regulated,
Very structured.
extremely structured, and it demands absolute precision. When a company buys a single $50 stapler, or when it sells $100 million worth of enterprise software, the accounting department is legally and functionally responsible for ensuring that transaction is captured perfectly.
And placed into the correct theoretical bucket, right?
Exactly. They are the ultimate scorekeepers. They tell you exactly what the score was at the end of the game, down to the final decimal point.
They are building the definitive record of what happened. And so, if accounting is the historian meticulously documenting the past, finance is what?
Finance is entirely about the future. It is the aggressive, forward-looking management of money, investments, and risk.
So they take the historian's data.
Right. Finance takes the historical data that the accountants have so carefully prepared, and it uses that data to make strategic decisions about tomorrow.
Like what kind of decision?
Finance asks the existential questions. Like, should we spend $50 million to build a new factory in Mexico? Should we acquire our biggest competitor? Do we have enough physical cash in the bank to survive a sudden, brutal economic recession?
So finance is the strategy. It's placing bets on the unknown.
Yes. It's all about placing those bets.
So if we go back to the car analogy, the accounting department is the rearview mirror and the odometer. It tells you exactly how far you've driven, how much gas you've burned, and what is sitting in the road behind you.
I love that.
But finance is the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the GPS trying to route you through upcoming traffic.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And just like driving a vehicle at highway speeds, both disciplines are absolutely vital, but they serve completely different operational purposes.
But you can't steer if you're blind.
Exactly. You cannot chart a safe, aggressive course for the future, which is the job of finance, without an incredibly accurate map of where you currently are and the exact road you just traveled.
Which is the job of accounting.
Right. If your odometer is lying to you, or your rearview mirror is entirely fogged over, your forward strategy is eventually going to end in a catastrophic crash. The forward-looking strategist relies entirely on the unwavering integrity of the backward-looking scorekeeper.
Okay, that makes the relationship so much clearer. So the accountants build these historical maps of the business. If I am the strategist or an investor or just an employee trying to read the terrain, what do these maps actually look like?
Well, there are three foundational pillars.
The big ones.
Yeah, the big three financial statements. You can think of them as three distinct lenses through which you view the anatomy of the company.
Okay, let's start with the first lens.
The first one is the balance sheet.
Right, the balance sheet. I've heard that term a million times.
The balance sheet is best understood as a snapshot. It is a photograph frozen in a single millisecond of time.
Like a freeze frame.
Exactly. It reveals the company's precise financial situation at that exact moment. It lists absolutely everything the company owns, everything it owes to outside parties, and the remaining value that belongs to the owners.
So it doesn't show motion.
Not at all. If you look at a balance sheet dated December 31st at midnight, it is a photograph of that exact second. It doesn't tell you what happened on December 30th, and it doesn't predict January 1st. It is just the reality of the present moment.
A static picture. Okay, that's lens number one, lens number two.
Lens number two is the income statement.
Okay, and if the balance sheet is a static photo?
Then the income statement is a video.
Oh, okay.
It tells the story over a specific duration of time, usually a quarter or a full fiscal year. It tracks all the revenues flowing into the business, subtracts all the expenses flowing out, and definitively tells you whether the company generated a profit or suffered a loss during that specific time frame.
So it's the ultimate tracker of economic performance.
Exactly. It shows the action.
Photograph, video. I have the snapshot of what I own and the video of how I performed over the last year. That brings us to the third map, which, frankly, always seemed incredibly redundant to me.
The cash flow statement.
Yes, the cash flow statement. This is often referred to as the lifeblood tracker, right? It strictly reflects the inflows and outflows of actual physical cash over time.
That's right. It strips away all the complex accounting theories, all the theoretical valuations, and it just asks one brutally simple question.
Which is?
Did the actual cash balance in our corporate bank account go up or down?
See, here is where I have to push back a little bit.
Go for it.
Why do we need a dedicated cash flow statement if we already have an income statement? Isn't profit basically the exact same thing as cash?
Oh, man.
I mean, if the income statement shows we made $10 million in profit this year, doesn't that inherently mean we have $10 million sitting in the bank vault?
What's fascinating here is that this specific misconception, this deeply held belief that profit equals cash, is the exact trap that kills the vast majority of young businesses.
Wait, really?
It is the deadliest illusion in corporate finance. Profit and cash are absolutely fundamentally not the same thing.
How is that mechanically possible, though? How can a company be highly profitable but not have any cash?
It comes down to the fundamental rules of how accounting actually works, specifically a concept called accrual accounting. Let's build a real-world scenario to show you.
Okay, lay on me.
Imagine you start a high-end consulting business.
Sounds great.
It's November, and you sign a massive, game-changing contract with a major corporation. You and your team work around the clock, you deliver brilliant strategic advice, and on November 30th, you send the client a formal invoice for $1 million.
A good month.
A great month. Under the strict rules of accounting, because you perform the service and earn the money, you must record that $1 million as revenue right now.
So my income statement for November looks spectacular.
It shows a massive profit. You are printing out that income statement and popping champagne.
Right, I did the work, I built them, I generated value, I am profitable.
Yes, you created economic value.
Right.
But here is the fatal catch. In the business-to-business world, clients rarely pay the exact second you hand them an invoice.
Oh, right.
That major corporation likely negotiated terms where they have 90 days to actually wire you the funds.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So December rolls around, you have expensive office rent to pay, you have to pay your consultant salaries, you have software vendors, you log into your corporate checking account, and the balance is zero.
Wow.
You cannot pay your staff with a profitable income statement. You cannot hand your commercial landlord a framed copy of your $1 million invoice.
You need actual liquid cash.
Exactly. A company can be incredibly profitable on paper. The income statement can look like an absolute masterpiece, but that same company will go completely bankrupt and shut its doors if it runs out of cash to fund its daily operations.
Wow. So you could literally die of thirst while swimming in a vast ocean of paper profit.
That is exactly what happens.
The accounting department is celebrating the score, while the finance department is panicking because they can't make payroll.
Precisely. And this introduces the absolute non-negotiable necessity of cash management. This is arguably the most vital core function of finance.
And that's exactly why the cash flow statement exists.
It serves as the harsh reality check against the optimism of the income statement. Maintaining a positive cash flow is simply a matter of survival. This is why financial managers spend so much time building a cash budget.
What goes into that?
A cash budget is a hyper-specific planning tool used to predict and control future cash needs. They have to map out exactly when the actual cash is expected to arrive in the bank account versus the exact dates it has to leave the bank account to pay suppliers and employees.
Right, matching up the timelines.
If the cash leaving happens before the cash arriving, the business dies. It's that simple, regardless of how profitable the overall video looks.
Okay, that makes the distinction crystal clear. Accounting tracks the theoretical value we created the profit, but finance has to fiercely manage the actual physical tokens the cash needed to survive today. That is a profound difference.
It changes how you look at everything.
It really does. So knowing that we have these three lenses, the snapshot, the video, and the reality check, let's zoom all the way in on the most structurally detailed map of all, the balance sheet.
Let's pull it apart.
If we want to diagnose a company's health, we first have to look at what it actually owns, the anatomy of its assets. When I look at a standard balance sheet, the assets aren't just thrown onto the page in a random jumble.
No, they're highly organized.
They're divided very carefully into current and fixed categories. What is the fundamental underlying logic behind how a balance sheet lists the things a company possesses?
The entire left side of the balance sheet is organized by a singular, vital concept, and that is liquidity.
Liquidity.
Yes. Liquidity is simply a measure of how fast and how easily an asset can be converted into actual spendable cash without having to slash its price to sell it quickly.
Okay.
The balance sheet forces a strict hierarchy. It starts with the most liquid, immediately spendable assets at the very top, and it slowly moves down the list to the heaviest, most illiquid assets at the absolute bottom.
It's like peeling the layers of an onion from the outside in. So sitting at the absolute top of the list, the undisputed king of liquidity,
Is cash and cash equivalent?
which is exactly what it sounds like.
It is the actual money sitting in the corporate checking accounts. Now, while a local retail store might have a little bit of physical petty cash in a lockbox in the back room, for a corporation, almost all of this is held electronically in financial institutions.
Makes sense.
This top category also includes what are called marketable securities.
What are those?
These are highly safe, highly liquid instruments like money market accounts or very short-term government bonds. It isn't physical cash in your hand, but if you need to make payroll, the corporate treasurer can click a button and have the cash transferred into the main operating account by tomorrow morning.
So it is instantly liquid.
Exactly. It faces zero conversion risk.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Right beneath the cash, we hit the second layer, accounts receivable.
Right.
This is the money that customers currently owe the business.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard a really great analogy for this that made the mechanics of it instantly click for me. It's the bar tab analogy.
I love that analogy because it perfectly demystifies what is essentially a massive web of corporate trust.
Walk us through it.
So when you become a regular at a local bar and the bartender knows you well, They might stop making you swipe your credit card for every single drink, right? They just keep a running tally on a notepad, and they trust you to settle the entire tab at the end of the night, or maybe even at the end of the week. That fundamental mechanism of trust and delayed payment is exactly how the global business-to-business or B2B economy operates.
So when a massive industrial supplier sells raw steel to an automotive manufacturer, they aren't demanding a giant corporate credit card be swiped on the loading dock before they unload the trucks.
Rarely, if ever. The friction of doing that would grind the economy to a halt. Instead, as trust and history grow between a supplier and a buyer, the supplier grants credit terms.
Like the 90 days we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The physical steel is delivered today, it enters the buyer's factory, but the invoice that accompanies it says the buyer has 30, 60, or perhaps 90 days to actually wire the cash.
So let's look at the supplier's balance sheet in that moment.
Right. They don't have the cash yet, so it can't go at the very top of the list. But they have a legally binding contractual promise of cash from a reputable buyer. That documented promise is an incredibly valuable asset.
That is the account receivable.
Yes. It sits just below cash because it is highly liquid, that cash is contractually arriving within a matter of weeks or months. However, it is fundamentally less liquid than cash in the bank because there is always a non-zero risk that the customer goes bankrupt tomorrow and defaults on the tab.
Which moves us down to the third major item in the liquidity hierarchy: inventories.
Yes.
These are the physical goods intended for sale. Depending on the company, this could be piles of raw materials, it could be half-finished products sitting on an active assembly line, or it could be the shiny finished goods boxed up and sitting in a massive distribution center.
All of it counts as inventory.
And this is where we have to talk about risk. How does a financial strategist look at a warehouse full of inventory? Let's contrast two completely different companies to see how inventory risk behaves. Häagen-Dazs ice cream versus Best Buy Electronics.
This is a brilliant way to illustrate how finance translates the physical world into a landscape of risk. To an amateur, inventory is just, stuff we can sell. But to a financial manager, not all inventory is created equal.
Because of the risk.
Right. The defining attribute of inventory is risk. How dangerous is it to hold this physical material in our possession?
Okay, let's unpack the Häagen-Dazs side of the equation first.
Sure.
They manufacture premium ice cream. Their physical inventory consists of thousands of gallons of raw milk, tons of sugar, imported vanilla beans, and millions of finished tubs of ice cream. What is their primary inventory risk?
Spoilage. Pure, absolute physical degradation.
Yeah, melting.
If the industrial freezer system fails, or if a refrigerated transport truck gets delayed in the middle of a summer heat wave, that inventory literally melts away. Its financial value drops from millions of dollars to absolute zero in a matter of hours.
So the entire financial strategy surrounding that inventory has to heavily account for physical preservation.
Preservation, lightning-fast turnover, and flawless cold chain logistics. They are under a ticking biological clock. They simply cannot afford to hold large stockpiles of finished ice cream for years, hoping the market improves.
But then you pivot and look at a massive retailer like Best Buy. They sell consumer electronics and home appliances. A warehouse full of televisions is structurally very different from a freezer full of vanilla bean ice cream.
Completely different. And what's crucial to understand is that Best Buy actually manages two distinctly different risk profiles within the exact same building.
How so?
Think about their appliance section, the washing machines, the refrigerators, the ovens. The core technology inside a standard kitchen oven does not change drastically from year to year. An oven built and boxed in 2024 performs roughly the exact same function as an oven built in 2025.
Right, it just gets hot.
Exactly. The risk of that oven becoming utterly useless and unsellable while sitting in the back warehouse is very low. It might be incredibly heavy, it takes up a massive amount of physical space, and it costs money to store. But financially, it is a relatively stable, low-risk asset to hold.
But then you walk to the other side of the store, where the LCD TVs, the gaming laptops, and the smartphones are.
Right. The fast-moving consumer electronics. Because these specific products experience a rate of technological evolution that is incredibly rapid, they carry a massive, terrifying risk of obsolescence.
Like Moore's Law.
Exactly. If Best Buy purchases 10,000 units of a high-end, cutting-edge television, and they fail to sell them within 6 or 8 months, what happens?
A new model comes out.
Yes, a rival manufacturer, or even the same manufacturer, is going to release a newer model that is demonstrably thinner, brighter, faster, and remarkably cheaper. Suddenly, those 10,000 TVs sitting in Best Buy's inventory aren't just taking up physical space, they are actively hemorrhaging financial value every single day.
They become toxic.
They are toxic assets. Best Buy will be forced to slash the prices, destroying their profit margin just to get that obsolete inventory out of the building before it becomes entirely worthless.
So holding a laptop or a TV in inventory is vastly more dangerous financially than holding an oven, even though they are sold in the same store.
Exactly, and that specific risk profile dictates everything. It changes how the company manages its cash reserves, how aggressively it negotiates with its suppliers for return policies, and how it prices its goods on the shelf. The balance sheet isn't just a lifeless list, it is a topological map of the company's operational risks.
Okay, moving further down the balance sheet, past the cash, past the bar tabs, past the risky inventory, we finally hit fixed assets. This is the heavy, immovable stuff: property, plant, and equipment.
Yes, these are the tangible, fundamentally long-term items that are absolutely required to actually operate the business on a daily basis. We are talking about the massive corporate headquarters building, the sprawling manufacturing plants, the multi-million-dollar robotic welding arms on the factory floor, the vast fleet of delivery trucks.
Really heavy stuff.
Very heavy. These are classified at the bottom of the active asset list because they are highly illiquid. If a company suddenly faces a massive cash crunch and needs to make payroll on Friday, they cannot simply sell a highly customized 500,000 square foot car factory by Thursday afternoon.
Right, you can't put a factory on Craigslist.
No, it takes months, sometimes years, to find a buyer, negotiate a price, and liquidate these massive structural assets.
Which brings us to the final and, frankly, most mysterious category on the asset side.
Yeah.
Other assets.
Yes.
And nestled inside this vague catch-all category is a term that always sounds to me like it belongs in a corporate self-help seminar, not a rigorous financial document. Goodwill.
Goodwill.
Now, I have to push back on this concept because the mechanics of it seem almost absurd. Let me make sure I understand this. Let's say a massive tech conglomerate decides to acquire a fast-growing software startup.
Okay.
The conglomerate pays $1 billion in cash for the startup. But when the accountants tally up the startup's actual physical assets, their laptops, their office furniture, maybe a few servers, it only equals, let's say, $100 million. The remaining $900 million premium that the conglomerate overpaid is just written down on their balance sheet under the category of goodwill. Isn't that just a fancy, legally sanctioned accounting trick to hide a massive loss? How can you possibly list a premium you overpaid as an actual legitimate asset?
What's fascinating here is that your reaction is entirely common. It feels like accounting sleight of hand. But goodwill represents a profound philosophical and deeply real financial reality in modern business. It is absolutely not imaginary money, and it is certainly not a trick.
Okay, I'm highly skeptical. Convince me. What is that $900 million actually buying?
It is capturing immense intangible value. Let's step away from the tech startup and think about a universally recognized company like Coca-Cola.
Okay.
Imagine if you were tasked with buying Coca-Cola tomorrow. If you meticulously added up the physical value of all their bottling plants worldwide, all their aluminum can inventory, all their sugar reserves, and their entire fleet of red delivery trucks, that physical asset number would be a tiny, almost laughable fraction of what the entire Coca-Cola company is actually worth on the open stock market.
Because of the brand.
Exactly, because the true overriding value of Coca-Cola is not in its factories. It is the brand. It is the secret recipe. It is the century of ingrained customer loyalty. It is the psychological reality that consumers all over the planet will willingly walk past a cheaper generic cola on the supermarket shelf and pay a premium for the familiar red can.
So when one company acquires another and pays that massive premium, they aren't just being foolish or reckless with their cash reserves.
Not at all. They are deliberately paying for a competitive advantage that already firmly exists in the minds of consumers or in the architecture of the market. They are buying a brilliantly functioning software engineering team that works seamlessly together, or they are buying highly lucrative patents, or they are buying a pristine, decades-old brand reputation.
You can't touch a reputation.
Right. The problem is, you cannot physically touch a brand reputation. You cannot put customer loyalty in a box and weigh it. So the accountants cannot legally list it under property or inventory. The accounting rules deliberately created the goodwill bucket specifically to capture and measure that real, undeniable economic value that was recognized and paid for during an acquisition. It is the literal financial measurement of reputation and market power.
That is deeply fascinating. It is essentially putting a concrete price tag on human psychology and market trust. Okay, so that exhaustive list covers the entire left side of our balance sheet map. That is everything the company owns, layered by liquidity, from the instant cash in the bank down to the high-risk TVs in the warehouse, the heavy factories, all the way down to the invisible psychological value of its brand reputation.
Yeah, that's the asset side.
But here is the critical second half of the equation. How did they actually pay for all of that stuff? That brings us to the right side of the balance sheet, liabilities and the ownership puzzle.
Right. If the asset side is a detailed list of what we have, the liabilities and equity side is a detailed map of who funded it. It is the sources of capital. It is a fundamental law of accounting. Every single asset a company owns, whether it's a stapler or a skyscraper, was paid for in one of two ways.
Borrowed or owned.
Exactly. They either borrowed the money from someone else or they took the money from the owners.
Let's tackle the borrowed money first. Liabilities. The very first item at the top of the liabilities list perfectly mirrors what we talked about with the bar tab analogy. We have accounts payable.
Yes, this is the exact mirrored image, the absolute opposite of accounts receivable. This is the money the company legally owes to third parties, which are usually its suppliers or vendors. If you received a massive shipment of raw materials into your factory, but you haven't actually paid the invoice yet, you have an account payable. You have an obligation to release cash in the near future.
I want to visualize how this connects the global economy. Let's trace a single physical transaction to see how it hits both sides of this equation. Let's use the ecosystem of a microchip manufacturer like Intel and a massive hardware manufacturer like Dell or Lenovo. Walk me through the exact steps.
It's a perfect illustration of how the global corporate economy is fundamentally just a massive interlocking web of balance sheets. Let's break down a single physical transaction. Intel manufactures a batch of highly advanced microchips. They pack those chips into a secure container, put them on a cargo plane, and ship them directly to a Dell manufacturing facility because Dell needs those chips to build their new line of laptops.
Okay, the chips are in motion.
Along with the physical chips, Intel's accounting department transmits a digital invoice to Dell, granting Dell standard terms. They have 30 days to pay the $10 million for the chips.
So the chips have moved. What exactly happens in the massive accounting departments of these two corporate giants at that exact moment?
On Intel's side, they just shipped out highly valuable inventory, but they haven't received a dime of cash yet. So, Intel's accountants record a $10 million account receivable. That is an asset for Intel. They have a legally enforceable claim to future cash.
And on Dell's side?
Simultaneously, at the exact same millisecond, Dell receives that invoice. Dell now possesses the physical chips, but they haven't parted with any cash. So on Dell's balance sheet, their accountants record a $10 million account payable. That is a liability for Dell. They have a strict obligation to send cash in the future.
So one is literally the mirror of the other.
Exactly. Intel's asset is literally Dell's liability. They are entirely bound together by that single piece of digital paper. If Dell goes bankrupt and can't pay, Dell's liability vanishes, but Intel's asset also violently evaporates, causing a shockwave.
It's a living ecosystem. That is a great way to visualize it. Okay, moving down to the liability side. We get past these short-term payables to suppliers, and we hit the much heavier stuff. Debt. Short-term and long-term debt. Bank loans, corporate bonds. There's something specific here that we need to highlight. Debt is entirely unique compared to accounts payable because it carries an explicit punishing mechanism, an interest rate.
Correct. Accounts payable to your suppliers usually don't charge you interest unless you are severely late on your payment. It's essentially free short-term financing based on supply chain relationships.
But bank debt is different.
Very different. When you go to a major bank for a term loan, or you issue a $100 million corporate bond to institutional investors, you are explicitly renting their capital. And the cost of renting that capital is the interest rate. Debt is a hard, unforgiving contractual obligation.
I'll have to pay no matter what.
You must pay the interest payments exactly on time, and you must pay back the original principal amount on a highly specific date. Absolutely. Regardless of whether your company had a record-breaking profitable year or a terrifying loss-making terrible year. The bank does not care about your struggles. They care about their contract.
It is truly unforgiving. Which leads us to the final piece of the structural puzzle, equity. This represents the actual owner's stake in the business. But okay, let's unpack this from the perspective of an everyday investor.
Okay.
If I am looking at a major publicly traded company and I want to invest my own hard-earned money into it, I essentially have a menu of options based entirely on the structure of this balance sheet. I could choose to buy their debt by purchasing a corporate bond, or I could choose to buy their equity, which usually means logging into my brokerage account and buying shares of common stock.
Right.
Or there's this mysterious third option that often gets ignored, preferred stock. What is the actual functional, mechanical difference between these three choices? Especially if things go spectacularly wrong. What happens in a true corporate emergency?
That is the perfect question to ask because the true, raw nature of these financial instruments only reveals itself when the company hits a crisis. Let's talk about the absolute worst-case scenario, the bankruptcy hierarchy.
Okay, things have gone bad.
Let's say the massive company you invested in utterly fails. Management was incompetent, the market shifted, and the company completely runs out of cash. It goes bankrupt, and a federal judge orders the company to undergo total liquidation.
Meaning everything must go.
Everything. That means they are going to fire everyone, sell off all the physical assets, auction off the factories, sell the remaining inventory for pennies on the dollar, sell the office chairs, and turn the entire remaining husk of the company into a single finite pile of cash sitting on a table.
Okay, so the company's dead, and there's a limited pile of cash sitting in the courtroom. Who gets to walk up to the table and eat first?
The debt holders are absolutely first in line. The major banks who issued the loans and the institutional investors who bought the corporate bonds. They hold what is called a senior legal claim on the assets. The bankruptcy court will systematically distribute that pile of cash to pay off the debt holders completely.
And if the money runs out?
And here is the brutal reality. If that pile of cash runs out before all the debt is paid off, the debt holders take a partial loss, the line stops moving right there, and absolutely nobody else behind them gets a single penny.
Wow. So where do the actual owners, the everyday people who bought shares of common stock, stand in this line?
They are standing at the very, very back of the line out in the parking lot. Equity fundamentally represents what is called a residual claim. Residual literally means what is left over.
So they get the leftovers.
If there are any. The common stockholders own the company, which means they get to enjoy all of the massive upside if the company succeeds and becomes a trillion-dollar global empire. The stock price goes to the moon. But that ownership also means they absorb the absolute maximum downside. In a bankruptcy liquidation, the common stockholders only get paid if every single secured debt holder, every unsecured bondholder, every supplier owed an account payable, and every employee owed back wages has been paid in full first.
And usually that doesn't happen.
Usually by the time the court gets to the very back of the line where the common stockholders are waiting, the cash is entirely gone. Their investment goes to absolute zero.
Maximum risk, maximum potential reward. Okay, but what about that third option on the menu? Preferred stock. This is often described as a hybrid instrument. What does that actually mean?
Preferred stock is a fascinating financial invention. It acts like a chimera, blending the attractive features of both debt and equity into a single instrument. Like debt, preferred stock usually pays a fixed, highly predictable dividend. It functions very similarly to an interest payment, providing steady income to the investor.
Okay, but what about the bankruptcy emergency?
Crucial to your question, it physically sits in the middle of the liquidation line.
Oh, really? It cuts the line.
Yes, exactly. If the company is liquidating, the powerful debt holders still get paid absolutely first. But if there is, by some miracle, money left over after the massive debts are cleared, the preferred stockholders get to walk up to the table and get paid before the common stockholders are allowed anywhere near the cash. They have legal preference. Hence the name.
But they don't have the power of debt.
Exactly. Unlike debt, they are technically still classified as owners. Which means if the company falls on hard times and decides to simply miss a dividend payment to save cash, the preferred stockholders cannot legally force the company into bankruptcy proceedings like a bank could. So it offers a carefully calibrated middle ground, more safety than common stock, more yield than debt, but without the ultimate legal power of a bondholder.
That is a brilliant breakdown of the stakes. Debt is the strict, unforgiving landlord who will evict you. Common equity is the wildly adventurous owner willing to lose it all for the jackpot. And preferred stock is the cautious, silent partner who just wants a steady check and a decent seat in the lifeboat.
That's a great way to summarize it.
This brings everything together beautifully. We now have the complete, intricate architectural structure of the business mapped out on the balance sheet. We know exactly what they own, layer by layer, and we know exactly who paid for it and what happens if it collapses.
But that's just the map.
Exactly. Here is the massive problem. Just looking at the static blueprint of a structure doesn't tell you if the machine is actually functioning well on a daily basis. I can look at the mechanical blueprint of a car's engine all day long, but that blueprint doesn't tell me if the engine is going to stall when I hit the gas. To do that, we need to run active diagnostic tests. We need the diagnostic toolkit, liquidity, and activity ratios.
This is exactly where the real analytical work begins. This is where we transition from simply reading the map to actively analyzing the treacherous terrain.
Ratios sound intimidating.
Financial ratios sound intimidating, but they are simply mathematical relationships between two different numbers pulled from the financial statements. By dividing one specific number by another, we strip away the raw size of the company and reveal deep, underlying operational insights that the raw numbers alone could never possibly tell us.
Let's start with the most recent tests. Liquidity ratios. The fundamental definition of these ratios is evaluating a company's ability to meet its short-term obligations. Essentially, we're asking the most terrifying question in business. Can this company actually pay its bills next month, or will it bounce a check and die? You described this process earlier as peeling the liquidity onion. How do financial analysts actually execute that?
Analysts test liquidity by getting progressively stricter, meaner, and more pessimistic with what they actually count as a usable asset. They want to systematically see what happens to the company in a worst-case scenario.
Okay, what's the first layer?
The first most basic and most optimistic test is the current ratio. The formula is straightforward. You take all of your current assets, that's your cash, your accounts receivable bar tabs, and your entire warehouse of inventory, and you divide it by all your current liabilities, which are the bills and short-term debts you absolutely have to pay in the next 12 months.
Okay, so let's do the math. If I have $2 million in total short-term assets, and I have $1 million in short-term bills due this year, my current ratio is exactly 2.
Precisely. And in a vacuum, a ratio of 2 means that for every $1 single of debt you owe, you have $2 of various assets to cover it. That sounds incredibly comfortable and safe. But an aggressive, paranoid financial analyst, say, a loan officer at a bank trying to decide whether to extend you a line of credit, will look at that too and say, wait a minute, what if there is a sudden, brutal economic shock? What if consumer spending stops and you suddenly cannot sell a single piece of your inventory?
So they get stricter.
This deep skepticism leads to the second, much harsher layer of the onion, the acid test, which is also known as the quick ratio.
The acid test. That sounds appropriately serious.
It is entirely serious. In the acid test, we calculate the exact same ratio again, but we completely and ruthlessly strip out inventory from the top of the equation.
Why do they take out inventory?
Because remember, our deep dive into Best Buy and those rapidly aging LCD TVs, you simply cannot guarantee that you can instantly liquidate a massive warehouse full of aging electronics at full retail price to pay a sudden, unexpected bill from a supplier. Inventory is, by definition, the least liquid of the current assets. It requires a willing customer.
So what's left?
So the acid test only looks at your actual cash and your accounts receivable against your short-term debts. It asks a much darker question: can you survive the next few months without selling another single product?
That is a much, much tougher standard to meet. It really exposes companies that are hoarding unsellable junk. But wait, you mentioned an even stricter test, the core of the onion.
Yes, the final, absolute, most pessimistic layer. The defensive test, often called the cash ratio, this is the ultimate doomsday scenario modeling.
It strips out inventory again.
It strips out the inventory, obviously, but it also ruthlessly strips out the accounts receivable.
Why the receivables? They owe you that money.
Because an analyst will say, what if the entire economy suffers a cascading failure and all of those customers who owe you money on their bar tabs suddenly go bankrupt themselves and default on you? The defensive test only looks at actual physical cash and immediate bank equivalents divided by current liabilities.
Just the cash on hand.
Just the cash. It asks the most fundamental question of corporate survival. If the entire global economy freezes tomorrow morning and nobody buys anything and nobody pays their debts, exactly how many days can you keep the lights on and pay your employees with just the actual cash currently sitting in your pocket?
That is genuinely terrifying, but I can see why it is an incredibly useful tool for a hardcore risk analyst. Now, before we move away from liquidity, there's one more vital concept here that isn't actually a ratio at all, but a raw number: working capital. How does that fit in? Why do we care about a raw number if we have all these elegant ratios?
That is an incredibly important distinction. The current ratio tells you the proportion of assets to liabilities, but a proportion cannot pay a vendor. Working capital is the raw, absolute dollar amount of current assets minus current liabilities. If you have $10 million in current assets and $8 million in current liabilities, your working capital is a raw $2 million.
Why does that matter more than the ratio?
Because if you want to buy a new piece of heavy machinery or launch a massive new marketing campaign, you don't pay for it with a ratio. You pay for it with absolute dollars. A company could have a fantastic current ratio of 3, but if their company is tiny and their actual working capital is only $10,000, they cannot afford to execute a major strategic move. The ratios tell you the health, working capital tells you the actual raw firepower you have available to deploy.
Health versus firepower. Got it. Okay, so that exhausts the raw survival math. The liquidity tests tell us if the patient is bleeding out. But a business isn't just trying to survive in a bunker, it's trying to actively operate and dominate a market. That brings us to activity ratios, how fast and how efficiently it's the company spinning its wheels.
Activity ratios strictly measure managerial efficiency. They strip away the excuses and ask, how well is the management team actually utilizing the specific assets they have been given?
So we're talking about turnover.
We look at turnover. For instance, receivables turnover: exactly how many times a year do you successfully collect all the money your customers owe you? Or inventory turnover: how many times a year do you completely empty out your warehouse and refill it with new stock? Or payables turnover: how fast do you pay your own suppliers?
Right, and the accepted framework gives us a brilliant way to translate those abstract turnover numbers into something we can actually visualize. A timeline of days. If you take 360 days in a financial year and divide it by the turnover number, you get a paid void,
Exactly.
like the average collection period.
Yep.
How many days, on average, does it take a stubborn customer to actually pay our invoice? Or the average payment period? How many days do we drag our feet before we pay our suppliers? And the average inventory rotation period. How many days does a product sit gathering dust on the shelf before a customer finally buys it?
Exactly. We are taking abstract mathematical efficiency and translating it into a highly visible, incredibly useful timeline of human days.
And there is one more massive, overarching efficiency ratio that captures the entire company's effort: total asset turnover. What is that measuring?
Total asset turnover looks at the entire massive pie. It takes total sales and divides it by total assets. It asks the ultimate efficiency question. For every single dollar of total assets you own, from the cash to the inventory to the massive factories, how many dollars of actual sales did management manage to squeeze out of them?
Wow, that's a big one.
It measures whether your massive asset base is a highly tuned engine generating massive revenue or a bloated, lazy anchor holding the company back.
That is a fantastic metric for the board of directors to look at. But returning to those timelines, we built the collection period, the inventory period, the payment period. This leads to what I think is the most elegant, illuminating concept in this entire deep dive. When you combine those three specific timelines together, you get the cash conversion cycle. I like to visualize this as the actual digestive system of the business.
That is a very visceral biological way to put it, but it's remarkably accurate. Walk me through the exact anatomy of this corporate digestive system.
Okay, here goes. The cash conversion cycle is a beautiful formula. It is the average collection period, PLUS, the inventory rotation period, minus the payment period. Let's translate that math into a real-world agonizing scenario. Day 1, you buy specialized raw materials to build a complex widget. Your generous supplier gives you 30 days to pay the invoice. That's your payment period.
Okay, 30 days.
It takes your factory 40 agonizing days to build the widget, let it sit in the warehouse, and finally sell it. That's your inventory rotation period. But you sold it to a major corporate customer on credit, and they take an infuriating 45 days to actually wire you the cash. That's your collection period.
That hurts just listening to it.
Right. So let's look at the actual cash. You had to spend real cash on day 30 to pay the supplier, but you didn't receive a single dime of cash from the customer until day 85. That means your cash conversion cycle is exactly 55 days. For 55 days, your vital cash was trapped, tied up in the digestive tract of the business.
Yeah.
The ultimate question is, how long does it take for a dollar spent on raw materials to finally come back as a dollar from a customer?
If we connect this to the bigger picture for you, the listener, truly understanding this specific cycle is the absolute secret to uncovering a truly elite world-class business. A shorter cash conversion cycle means a vastly healthier, more economically agile, and exponentially more profitable business.
How so? Unpack the mechanics of why shorter is better.
Think about the painful math of the scenario you just built. Your cash was completely tied up and inaccessible for 55 days. That means you had to go to a bank, draw down on a line of credit, borrow money, and pay actual interest fees just to survive and make payroll during those 55 days while you waited for the customer's cash to arrive.
Right. because my employees still need to eat.
Exactly. That destroys your profit margin. Now, let's look at a masterclass. Imagine a company like Amazon in its early hypergrowth days. Amazon would buy a pallet of books from a major publisher and use their massive market power to negotiate to pay that publisher in 60 days.
Okay.
But Amazon would sell that book to a retail customer online, and the customer's credit card would clear the bank in exactly 2 days.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going. So they get the cash on day 2, but they don't actually have to pay the supplier until day 60.
Exactly. That is what is known as a negative cash conversion cycle. They are actively collecting money from their customers weeks or months before they even have to pay their suppliers for the exact same goods. Their suppliers are effectively, unknowingly funding Amazon's explosive growth for absolutely free.
That is wild.
Amazon has a massive 58-day window where they can take that customer's cash, hold it in the bank, earn interest on it, or more likely use it to buy even more inventory or build more servers. A negative cash conversion cycle is the absolute holy grail of corporate finance.
That is genuinely mind-blowing. It completely flips the traditional concept of a retail business on its head. They aren't just selling books. They are managing a massive rolling float of free capital provided by their own vendors.
It's a beautiful machine.
Okay, so liquidity ratios tell us if the company will survive next month, and activity ratios tell us how efficiently its daily digestive system processes cash. But what about the long game? What about next year or 5 years from now? What about generating massive long-term wealth for the shareholders? That brings us to Section 5, long-term health, leverage, profitability, and the DuPont analysis.
We're finally stepping back from the daily grind of operations and looking at the massive, overarching architecture of the company's financial strategy. Let's start with leverage.
Ratios like debt to assets and debt to equity. The basic idea here seems to be simple. How heavily is this company relying on borrowed money to fuel its existence?
Yes, and leverage is the perfect word for it because leverage in finance behaves exactly like leverage in physics. It is a powerful tool designed to magnify force.
Like a literal lever.
Exactly. If you use massive amounts of debt to fund your business expansion and the business does incredibly well, your returns are massively, spectacularly magnified because you are making a huge profit using someone else's money. You look like a genius. But if the business stumbles, if the market turns, leverage magnifies the losses just as violently. The debt payments don't stop just because your sales dropped. This is where we look at ultimate survival metrics, specifically the interest coverage ratio.
Break that down. How does it measure survival?
It takes the company's operating income, the profit from its actual business, and divides it by its financial expenses, which are the mandatory interest payments on its debt. It tells you exactly how many times over the company can afford to pay its mandatory interest with its current operating profits.
So higher is better.
Much better. If your income is $10 million and your interest is $1 million, your coverage is 10. You are incredibly safe. But if that number drops dangerously close to 1, the company is dancing on the absolute edge of a cliff. It means almost every single dollar of profit is going straight to the bank just to pay the interest. One bad quarter, one slight dip in sales, and they default on their loans.
So leverage is essentially fire. It cooks your food and heats your house, but if you lose control of it, it will burn your entire life down.
That's a great way to think about it.
And building on that, there is another crucial metric here that looks deeper than just interest. Debt service coverage. And to understand that, we have to tackle an acronym that gets thrown around constantly on financial news networks. EBITDA.
Oh, EBITDA.
Okay, let's unpack this. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Why do Wall Street analysts absolutely obsess over EBITDA?
Because Wall Street analysts want to see the raw, unadulterated cash-generating power of the core business engine, entirely stripped of all the accounting noise and financial structuring.
How do they do that?
Let's break the acronym down. We start with earnings, the net income. But then we add back the interest and taxes because those depend on how the company is financed and where it is located, not how well it sells products. And crucially, we add back depreciation and amortization.
Right, because depreciation, like the gradual loss of value of a factory over 20 years, is an accounting expense that lowers your profit. But it doesn't actually cost you any physical cash this year. You aren't writing a check to depreciation.
Exactly. So EBITDA is arguably the closest proxy we have to the pure operating cash flow of the business. It tells you how much raw cash did the core operations generate. And that brings us to the debt service coverage ratio.
Which is?
This ratio takes that powerful EBITDA number and it divides it by the total mandatory debt payments for the year, which includes both the interest and the principal repayment. It is the ultimate stress test.
Not just interest anymore, the actual principal, too.
Right. It asks, does the pure cash generated by the engine actually cover the massive mortgage payments required to keep the bank away? If that ratio falls below 1, the company is effectively a zombie, burning cash just to survive.
That is an incredible way to look at it. Okay, moving from the danger of leverage to the goal of the entire enterprise. Profitability. We hear terms like gross margin and net margin thrown around in earnings reports constantly.
These margins simply measure the absolute efficiency of generating actual profit from top-line revenue. Gross margin looks strictly at the direct costs of creating the product. If you sell a premium shirt for $100 and the raw cotton and the direct factory labor cost you $40, your gross margin is 60%. It shows the fundamental baseline profitability and pricing power of your core product.
And net margin.
Net margin, however, is the final, brutal truth. It takes out absolutely everything: the marketing budget, the corporate headquarters rent, the taxes, the interest payments on that massive debt we just talked about. If you are left with only $5 at the very end of all of that, your net margin is 5%.
Which finally leads us to the big ones, the ultimate scorecards for investors. ROA, return on assets, and ROE, return on equity. Let's focus on ROE, because it is essentially the holy grail metric.
It really is.
ROE is simply net income divided by equity. It asks a deeply personal question for the investor. For every single dollar the owners put into this business, how much actual profit did the business generate for them this year? The higher the better, right?
On the surface, absolutely yes. ROE is arguably the single most scrutinized number an equity investor looks at. But looking at a raw, isolated ROE number is incredibly dangerous. It can completely blind you to catastrophic risk.
And this is where this deep dive reaches its absolute intellectual peak. The accepted framework for corporate finance highlights an analytical tool called the DuPont analysis, heavily popularized by professors like Mihir A. Desai at Harvard Business School.
Brilliant framework.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. ROE is just a shockingly simple fraction. Net income divided by equity. Why on earth did massive industrial conglomerates in the 1920s and later the brightest minds at Harvard Business School feel the desperate need to invent an entirely new, complex analytical framework just to look at this one simple fraction?
Because a single consolidated number is often a very deceptive liar. The profound brilliance of the DuPont formula is that it recognizes a fundamental truth of business. There is vastly more than one way to achieve a high return on equity, and not all of those ways are actually healthy. Some of them are incredibly dangerous.
So what does DuPont do?
The DuPont analysis takes that single, opaque fraction of ROE and violently shatters it into 3 distinct, highly transparent operational levers.
Okay, walk us through these 3 levers. Let's x-ray this fraction.
The DuPont formula mathematically expands ROE into 3 multiplied components. Lever number 1 is profitability, which is measured by the net profit margin. This lever asks, are you pricing your goods well and ruthlessly controlling your expenses? Are your margins fat?
Okay, lever 1 is margin.
Lever number 2 is efficiency, which is measured by total asset turnover. This lever asks, are you utilizing your massive factories, your retail stores, and your inventory rapidly to generate massive sales? How fast are you spinning the wheels?
Lever 2 is speed.
And lever number 3 is leverage, which is measured by the equity multiplier. This lever asks the dangerous question, are you using massive amounts of borrowed debt safely to artificially magnify your returns to the owners?
So ROE isn't just one number. It is fundamentally profit margin multiplied by asset turnover multiplied by leverage. How does breaking it apart like that expose the mechanical truth? Let's build a scenario.
Let's create a massive, immersive scenario to prove the power of this. Let's look at 3 completely different companies, Company A, Company B, and Company C. You are an institutional investor, and you are staring at a spreadsheet. You see that all 3 companies boast an incredibly impressive return on equity of exactly 15%.
Sounds like 3 good companies.
If you are a lazy analyst and only look at that one number, you might assume they are equally brilliant, identical investments. But let's run them through the rigorous DuPont scanner and look at their actual DNA.
Okay, Company A. Let's make them a high-end, exclusive luxury jeweler on Fifth Avenue.
Perfect. Let's look at their levers. Company A, the luxury jeweler, has a staggeringly high profit margin. When they finally sell a diamond necklace, they make a massive, lucrative markup. That's lever 1.
Huge margin.
But let's look at lever 2. Their asset turnover is abysmally low. They do
Mm.
not sell a diamond necklace every 5 minutes. That extremely expensive inventory might sit locked in a glass display case for 8 months before a buyer walks in.
So very slow.
However, let's look at Lever 3. They are very conservative. They have almost zero debt. Their leverage multiplier is minimal, so their 15% ROE is built almost entirely on incredible pricing power and massive margins, safely offsetting their painfully slow sales and lack of debt. That is a very specific, highly stable, premium business model.
Okay, now let's completely pivot. Let's look at Company B. Let's make them a massive nationwide chain of heavy discount grocery stores.
In excellent contrast, let's scan Company B. Their profit margin, Lever 1, is razor thin. It is practically microscopic. They make mere pennies of profit on every single box of generic cereal they sell. But look at Lever 2. Their asset turnover is astronomical. They are emptying and restocking their massive warehouse shelves constantly, day and night. They push immense volume. And to fund their massive nationwide footprint of stores, they use a moderate amount of debt. When you multiply their tiny, fragile margin by their massive churning turnover by their moderate leverage, the math spits out exactly 15% ROE.
Wow, so they arrive at the exact same 15% destination as the jeweler, but they are driving a completely different vehicle. But you mentioned a Company C. What is the dark side of this?
Company C is a generic, mediocre manufacturing company that was recently bought out by a highly aggressive private equity firm. Let's look at their levers. Their profit margin is terrible. They are inefficient and wasteful. Their asset turnover is sluggish. Their factories are outdated.
Sounds like a night.
By all operational metrics, they are a failing business. But the private equity firm loaded the company up with a staggering astronomical amount of high-interest debt to fund the buyout. Their leverage, Lever 3, is pushed to the absolute maximum. When you multiply their terrible margin by their terrible turnover, by their absolutely massive, terrifying leverage, the math artificially inflates the final number to exactly 15% ROE.
That is horrifying.
Ah,
The
yeah.
ROE looks great, but the company is a house of cards.
Exactly. And here is why the DuPont analysis is genius. It tells you what happens when the environment changes. What if there's a sudden global recession and the central bank violently spikes interest rates?
Oh, I see.
Company A, the luxury jeweler, might sell fewer diamonds, but they have no debt to service. They will comfortably survive the winter. Company B, the grocer, sells food. People still have to eat. Their massive turnover protects them.
The Company C.
But Company C, the heavily leveraged manufacturer, if their mandatory interest payments double overnight because rates went up, their terrible profit margin is instantly wiped out, the massive leverage violently turns against them, and their artificial 15% ROE instantly turns into a catastrophic, bankrupting loss. The DuPont analysis exposes the mechanical, structural truth behind the return. It tells you exactly how the sausage is made so you can intelligently decide if you actually want to eat it.
That is an incredibly powerful tool. You are basically using math to x-ray the management team's collective brain to see exactly what survival strategy they are relying on: premium pricing, high-speed volume, or dangerous financial engineering.
It's basically a lie detector.
So what does this all mean for the big picture? We have meticulously diagnosed the present. We know their liquidity. We know their operational speed. We map their leverage, and we expose the true quality of their returns. But as we established in the very first 5 minutes of this entire deep dive, finance is absolutely not about the present.
No, it is not.
Finance is exclusively about the future. How does a strategist take all these complex historical numbers and actually use them to look forward into the fog?
This brings us to the final, most complex stage of our journey, looking to the future through projections and scenario planning. This is the exact arena where a brilliant chief financial officer truly earns their massive salary. They are required to take these historical financial statements and mathematically project them into the unknown future to accurately forecast performance and plan their major strategic moves.
How is that practically done? They don't have a crystal ball. How do you predict the future with math?
You use the immediate past as your launchpad. Financial analysts take the specific historical trends we just spent an hour dissecting from the income statement and the balance sheet, and they build massive interlocking mathematical models.
What are they asking the model?
They ask if our top-line sales steadily grew by 5% a year for the last 3 historical years, exactly what mechanically happens to our absolute need for physical cash, our warehouse space for inventory, and our factory output capacity if sales grow by 6% next year. Every single number is connected. But a good CFO doesn't just blindly build one single optimistic model. They rigorously perform what is called sensitivity analysis using extreme hypothetical scenarios.
The standard framework outlines three primary lenses for this forecasting. Let's walk through the human element of planning these. The first is obviously the base scenario.
The base scenario is firmly rooted in current observable conditions. It is the anchor. It assumes the status quo generally holds steady, the broader economy stays stable, inflation remains roughly manageable, and customer buying behavior doesn't change drastically. It's the standard business as usual expectation that you present to the board.
Then we have the optimistic scenario. Now, my instinct says this is just a happy dream where everyone gets a bonus. But from a financial perspective, what are they actually modeling?
They are modeling the severe logistical dangers of rapid success.
Grangers.
Yes. This scenario asks, what if things go spectacularly our way? What if our new product launch goes incredibly viral on social media and consumer demand literally doubles overnight? What if the central bank unexpectedly drops interest rates, making our massive debt suddenly much cheaper to service?
That's that a danger.
The financial team absolutely has to model this because if demand suddenly doubles, do we actually have enough working capital, that raw cash we talked about, to rapidly buy the raw materials to meet that massive demand? Do we need to instantly hire a second and third shift of factory workers? Rapid, unpredicted success can violently bankrupt a company just as fast as failure if they do not have the liquid cash reserves to fund the explosive growth.
Wow, that is a counterintuitive thought. Planning for massive success is actually a crucial exercise in financial risk management. You can grow yourself into bankruptcy.
Happens all the time.
And that leaves the third lens, the pessimistic scenario.
The nightmare scenario. This is an exercise in pure paranoia. It forces management to rigorously consider highly unfavorable conditions and severe existential potential risks.
Like what?
What if there is a massive global supply chain breakdown? Think back to our Best Buy example. What if a sudden geopolitical crisis halts all cargo shipments of LCD TVs from Asia right before the crucial holiday shopping season? What if a massive, well-funded competitor enters our market and deliberately slashes their retail prices by 20% to bleed us dry?
Just total defense.
The pessimistic scenario viciously tests the company's defensive perimeter. It forces the CFO to look back at those brutal liquidity ratios we discussed, the acid tests and the defensive tests, to mathematically ensure the company can actually survive a long, brutal economic winter.
This entire process makes me realize that high-level corporate finance is essentially just high-stakes, highly disciplined storytelling, using math as the vocabulary.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
Speaking of the stories these numbers tell, there is a fascinating deductive exercise that analysts use to train their brains. I want us to try it right now. The framework we are exploring outlines a game and activity where financial analysts look at 14 completely unidentified companies. They only get to see the raw financial statements and the ratios, no company names, no corporate logos, no industry labels. And just by looking at the pure structure of the ratios, they have to logically deduce exactly what industry that company operates in.
It is a phenomenal, incredibly illuminating exercise, and it brilliantly proves absolutely everything we've talked about today. The numbers always betray the business model.
Let's play a miniature version of it right now for you, the listener, to test our new toolkit. I'm going to describe the broad financial profile of an anonymous company based on the deep concepts we've learned today. You use your deductive reasoning to tell me exactly what kind of business it is.
I love this. I'm ready.
Okay, mystery company number 1. I am staring at their balance sheet. They hold absolutely massive amounts of physical inventory. It dominates their asset side. When I look at their income statement, their gross profit margins are incredibly thin, maybe 2 or 3% at best.
Okay, thin margins.
But when I check their activity ratios, their asset turnover is completely off the charts. They are rotating that massive inventory constantly. And crucially, their accounts receivable is practically zero. It seems their customers pay them immediately. What is it?
Let's deduce this. High physical inventory but zero accounts receivable means everyday people are walking in and buying physical goods with cash or immediate credit cards, not corporations buying on 30-day terms.
Yep.
The razor-thin profit margins combined with off-the-charts turnover is the absolute classic, undeniable profile of a massive discount grocery store chain or a giant supermarket. They make pennies on a staggering volume of food.
Spot on. The math perfectly matches the aisles of a supermarket. Okay. Mystery company number 2. I look at their balance sheet, and it is a ghost town on the physical side. They have almost zero physical inventory. No warehouses. Their absolutely biggest asset category by far is accounts receivable. Massive corporations owe them a ton of money over very long 90-day periods.
Okay, very different.
Their gross margins are huge, maybe 70%, but their income statement shows they spend a massive, staggering amount of their gross revenue purely on employee salaries. What industry?
This is a completely different beast. No physical inventory means they do not sell physical goods. Their product is entirely intangible. The massive gross margins paired with astronomical employee salary expenses means their actual inventory is human brainpower.
Yes.
And the massive accounts receivable balance means they exclusively bill other massive corporations on long, slow payment cycles. You are looking directly at a high-end professional services firm. This is a massive global consulting agency, a prestigious accounting firm, or perhaps a boutique custom software development company. They sell time and expertise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The human capital model. Let's do one more to bring it home. Mystery company number 3. Their balance sheet is overwhelmingly dominated by absolutely massive fixed assets. We are talking billions of dollars in property, plant, and equipment. It crushes everything else.
Very heavy.
When I look at their cash flow statement, their monthly cash flow is remarkably steady, boring, and highly predictable month over month. But to finance all of those heavy assets, their balance sheet shows an enormous, almost frightening amount of long-term debt.
Okay, let's piece that together. Billions in immovable fixed assets funded by massive long-term debt, but sustained by boring, highly predictable monthly cash flow. That is the exact structural footprint of a heavily regulated public utility company.
You got it.
Think of a massive regional power grid operator, a water treatment authority, or perhaps a major national telecommunications company that had to borrow billions to physically lay fiber optic cables across an entire continent. They have massive, unavoidable upfront capital expenditures funded by Wall Street debt, but they have a massive, captive customer base paying a completely predictable $80 monthly bill, which ensures the steady, relentless cash flow absolutely required to safely service that mountain of debt.
This raises a profoundly important point, doesn't it? These numbers, these ratios, these balance sheets, they aren't just arbitrary academic scores. They are a physical, structural reflection of the business model.
Exactly. Financial statements are fundamentally the unique fingerprint, the underlying DNA of an entire industry. By deeply understanding the fundamental structure of the assets and liabilities, by applying the rigorous diagnostic ratios to test for survival and efficiency, and by mathematically projecting those scenarios forward to anticipate the future, you weren't just doing math. You are reading the fundamental, raw reality of how a coordinated group of human beings are actively trying to survive and navigate the brutal economic world.
That is a brilliant, overarching way to synthesize this entire complex subject, and that essentially brings us to the end of the roadmap we laid out. Let's briefly recap the massive journey we just took. We started at the absolute foundation by drawing that critical, bright red line. Accounting is the historian that meticulously tells you exactly where you have been, but finance is the general that tells you where you are aggressively going. We learned the hard way that profit is merely an accounting theory, but actual liquid cash is the oxygen required for daily survival.
We deeply deconstructed the balance sheet, coming to understand that assets are rigidly ranked by liquidity from the instant cash in the bank down to the highly risky, obsolescence-prone inventory of electronics, all the way down to the invisible psychological power of goodwill. We map the liabilities, seeing clearly how one company's payable is literally another company's receivable, binding the entire global economy together in a web of trust.
We looked at the terrifying reality of the bankruptcy hierarchy, where debt acts as a strict, unforgiving landlord who will liquidate you, while equity eagerly absorbs all the massive risk for a chance at the upside. We then ran the grueling diagnostic tests. We meticulously peeled the liquidity onion from the current ratio down to the defensive test to see if a company could actually survive a sudden economic freeze. And we traced the biological digestive system of the cash conversion cycle to see exactly how fast the company can turn raw materials back into spendable cash, exploring how Amazon used supplier float to conquer the world.
And perhaps most importantly for anyone trying to understand valuation, we utilize the powerful DuPont analysis to violently shatter the comforting illusion of a single return on equity number. We learned how to mathematically expose whether a management team is relying on brilliant pricing power, high-speed volume, or dangerously explosive levels of debt to generate their returns. Finally, we saw how strategic CFOs take all of this historical DNA and use it to map out optimistic dreams and pessimistic nightmares.
This entire deep dive has been dedicated to giving you, the listener, a completely new, highly powerful set of lenses to view the world. Whether you are rigorously evaluating a public company you might want to invest your life savings into, whether you are simply trying to understand the seemingly irrational, strange decisions your CEO is making at your current job, or if you are quietly dreaming of starting your own business one day and want to avoid the deadly cash flow trap, you now possess the diagnostic toolkit. You know the vital signs to look for. You understand that not all physical inventory carries the same risk, that a wildly profitable company can still easily run out of cash and die, and that not all return on equity is achieved the exact same way. You can finally read the matrix.
You know, we spend so much of our professional time in these complex discussions, diligently applying these rigorous ratios, the DuPont analysis and stress testing scenario plans, to massive, faceless, multi-billion-dollar corporations. But the fundamental principles of finance, of resource management and risk are entirely universal. I will leave you with this final, perhaps slightly uncomfortable but deeply provocative thought. What if we stripped away the corporate veil and directly applied the rigorous principles of corporate finance to our own personal
Oh,
lives?
wow. I really like where this is going. Turn the lens inward.
Think about it deeply. Have you ever sat down and brutally audited your own personal balance sheet? What is your personal cash conversion cycle for your own daily energy and your finite time? Are you expending massive amounts of physical and emotional effort every day and waiting far too long for the psychological, professional, or financial return? And think critically about your personal assets. Are you currently holding on to personal inventory, perhaps specific coding skills, old industry knowledge, or outdated daily habits that are at severe risk of rapid technological obsolescence? Exactly like Best Buy holding on to those aging, worthless LCD TVs. We are living in an era of AI and unprecedented rapid change. Are your current skills the stable, highly reliable oven, or are they the incredibly risky, rapidly aging TV? Maybe it's time for all of us to sit down and run a ruthless personal DuPont analysis on our own career strategy. Are you relying on high margin, highly valuable rare skills? Are you just relying on high volume, exhausting hustle? Or are you relying on a dangerous amount of personal leverage that could collapse if the environment changes?
That is a profoundly challenging, brilliant thought to leave off on. Are your hard-earned skills a durable asset, or are they rapidly becoming obsolete inventory? Thank you for taking this massive, intricate journey with us into the architecture of business. It is a dense, complex world, but once you finally decode the language, it is endlessly fascinating. Remember, the raw numbers are never just numbers. They are the story of human endeavor. Keep reading them, keep questioning them. We will see you on the next deep dive.